In 1940, a young woman painted this picture of herself. She's lying on a bed in the fetal position with her legs wide open. It's a self-portrait of Frida Kahlo, and she would never let anyone see it. She hid it from her husband, who was also her cousin. She hid it from her doctors and even her friends. And when she died, she made sure that it was destroyed. But, luckily for us, an assistant copied the painting before destroying the original. This is the most erotic painting by one of the most erotic artists in history. So why would she hide it? Well, that's what we're going to talk about today. Specifically, we're gonna talk about how Frida Kahlo's toxic love life inspired some of her most famous art. So here's the thing. We generally think of Frida Kahlo as being this super cool, confident woman who was comfortable in her own skin. And yeah, that's true. Here is a picture of her at age 20 when she had just met the love of her life. This is Diego Rivera, a woman. They got married in 1929, and when they met, it was love at first sight for both of them. Like seriously, look at this picture. Can you feel the love? I can. But things took a turn when Diego started cheating on her. The way I like to think of it is that their marriage had two phases. The first phase lasted from 1929 until 1937. This was the time period where Diego cheated on Frida but still acted like this devoted husband. He brought her to fancy parties and introduced her to his friends, and they were really good at keeping up appearances. So all of Frida's friends thought that she was living the dream. But behind closed doors, it was actually quite the opposite. See, Diego was really abusive towards Frida. Not only did he cheat on her constantly, but he would beat her up and sometimes even leave her for weeks at a time. So not only did she have to deal with the emotional trauma of him cheating, but she also had to deal with the physical trauma of him beating her up. There are lots of rumors as to why Diego mistreated her so much. Some say that it was because she had an affair with a man named Jose there is this one picture of Frida and Jose standing next to each other that looks pretty intimate. But regardless of whether or not she cheated on Diego, that doesn't excuse his behavior. He literally shot her in the face once, and that wasn't even Anyway, the first phase of the marriage lasted until 1937 when Frida finally had enough. She kicked Diego out of their house after catching him with one of her friends. As you might imagine though, it didn't last long before she took him back. Despite all the pain that he had caused her, she couldn't help but forgive him. That's how powerful their love was. See, during this time period, Frida began to develop schizophrenia. She was having intense delusions and hallucinations, and that coupled with the stress of the marriage made her start cutting herself. She cut off her hair, she cut off her eyebrows, she cut off all of her body hair. In fact, she even cut off her own genitals. That's why she's always wearing these big flowy dresses in her portraits. She wanted to hide the scars. But then in 1938, she had an epiphany. She realized that if she was going to move on from her troubled past, she needed to embrace it. So she stopped cutting herself and began to wear these Tijuana dresses. These are traditional Mexican dresses that feature bold colors and patterns, and they became one of her It was also around this time that she began to experiment with her art. For example, during her second lobotomy in 1953, she had a vision of a skeleton dressed in a Tijuana dress, dancing in a cemetery. This inspired her to paint one of her most famous works, Dance of the Dead or La Danza de la Muerte. And now we come to the final phase of her marriage, which lasted from 1940 until her death in 1954. By this point, both of them were pretty much outcasts of the art world. Diego had been accused of being a communist, and Frida had been institutionalized several times due to her deteriorating mental state. So they began to throw these massive parties, inviting people from all over the world. Writers, painters, poets, actors, you name it. They came from all over the world to hang out with these two outcasts. And that included celebrities like Ava Gardner, who was one of Hollywood's biggest stars at the time. At one of these parties, Frida met a young photographer named Nicolas Mire. He was immediately smitten with her, but she rejected his advances. However, she did allow him to take photographs of her, and those photographs were very successful. In fact, they launched his career. But then, in 1949, everything changed. Frida became seriously ill and she asked Nicholas to take care of her. And when she recovered, their relationship became romantic. This was a secret that they kept for the rest of Frida's life. And that brings us to the painting that we talked about at the beginning of this video. It's called Henry Ford Hospital, and it depicts her going into labor at the hospital alone. She miscarried shortly after getting pregnant by Nicholas Murray, and that's why she's in the fetal position. But it's also symbolic of her desire to become a mother. She desperately wanted to have a baby, but her schizophrenia made it impossible. She suffered from something called pseudocyesis, which means that she believed she was pregnant even though she wasn't. She had all the symptoms, too. Her belly grew. She threw up. She felt the baby kick. But at the end of the day, nothing was ever in there. I mean, you have to feel bad for the guy. Just imagine being in love with the woman of your dreams and knowing that you can never have a child together. That's what this painting is about. And it was one of the only times that she was actually honest about her relationship with Nicholas. But even that wasn't enough to make Diego jealous. After seeing the painting, he simply smiled and said, "Who is Henry Ford?" Now obviously that was a lie. Diego knew exactly who Henry Ford was, but he didn't want to cause any drama. He was happy with his life, and he wanted Frida to be happy, too. So he encouraged her to pursue a relationship with Nicholas, which brings us to the next painting. This one is called The Broken Column, and it shows Frida with a broken spine. She has a medical corset wrapped around her torso, and she's crying tears of blood. Now, this one is pretty straightforward. It symbolizes her broken spine that she developed from the bus accident when she was 18 years old. But it also symbolizes her broken relationship with Diego. He was supposed to be the support that held up her spine, but instead he broke her heart. That's why she titled this painting The Broken Column. That's also why she turned away from him and towards Nicholas. She was ready to move on with her life. In fact, she was so happy with Nicholas that she decided to get a divorce. She wanted to marry him, but unfortunately, she never got the chance. She died of a pulmonary embolism in 19... When Diego found out that she had cheated on him, he was devastated. He had always loved her, and he couldn't believe that she would cheat on him with someone that he considered to be his brother. However, he respected her decision to divorce him and move on with her life. In fact, he even attended her funeral. And when he saw Nicholas there, he embraced him like a brother. He knew that Nicholas had made her happy, and that's all that mattered. The reason I tell you all of this is because Frida's art wouldn't have been possible without the love of her life. Sure, Diego broke her heart, but that's what inspired her to create some of her most iconic work. The same goes for her mental illness. She wouldn't have become such a great artist if it weren't for her illness. And that's the lesson that we need to learn. Sometimes our greatest pain can become our greatest source of strength. Thanks for watching.